The last waves lapped against muddy shores in what would one day become eastern Montana, their retreat marking the end of an era that had lasted for millions of years. 69 million years ago, the Western Interior Seaway, a shallow sea that once split North America from the Gulf of Mexico to the Arctic Ocean, began its final withdrawal from the northern Great Plains, leaving behind a landscape that would become ground zero for one of science's greatest detective stories. This isn't just another tale of ancient seas drying up, it's the story of how a geological formation called Hell Creek became the most famous rock unit on Earth, preserving the exact moment when the age of dinosaurs ended. Picture the scene as the seaway retreated, vast expanses of newly exposed seafloor transforming into coastal plains, rivers carving fresh channels through soft marine sediments, and life adapting to a world suddenly drained of its defining feature. The Fox Hills Formation captures those final beach deposits, classic shore-face structures, and the burrowing traces of creatures called scolithos that once lived in the surf zone. Above these marine rocks, a different story begins to unfold in the sediments we now call the Hell Creek Formation. Near the town of Jordan, Montana, at coordinates 47.6167 degrees north and 106.8923 degrees west, the Hell Creek Formation caps this dramatic environmental transition. Here, at an elevation of roughly 716 meters above today's sea level, exposures of Hell Creek sediments tell the story of the final 1 to 2 million years of the Cretaceous period. These aren't just any old rocks, they're the last chapter of the Mesozoic era, the final pages in the book of the dinosaurs' world. The formation itself reaches thicknesses of 60 to 110 meters across the region, with the type section at Flag Butte preserving about 84 meters of Hell Creek within a composite section of roughly 110 meters total. But thickness measurements barely hint at the drama these rocks contain. Within their layers lies evidence of Triceratops and Tyrannosaurus rex, of ancient rivers and floodplains, and most crucially, of the boundary between the Cretaceous and Paleogene periods, the infamous KPG boundary that marks one of the most catastrophic events in Earth's history. What makes Hell Creek so remarkable isn't just that it preserves dinosaur fossils, though it does that spectacularly. It's that these rocks capture a complete environmental transition and then document what happened when that world ended abruptly. The Hell Creek Formation overlies the marine Fox Hills Formation and is itself overlain by the Fort Union Formation, with the contact between Hell Creek and Fort Union typically coinciding with a thin clay layer that contains some of the most important evidence ever discovered about mass extinction. The name Hell Creek turns out to be eerily appropriate. When early geologists first encountered these badlands, they found a landscape carved by the modern Hell Creek itself, a waterway that cuts through sediments deposited when this region was very different from today's semi-arid plains. The regression of the Western Interior Seaway had literally left hell behind, a maze of eroded channels, exposed fossil bones, and hostile terrain that challenged the first paleontologists brave enough to work here. But why should we care about some old rocks in Montana and the Dakotas? Because Hell Creek doesn't just preserve the end of the dinosaurs, it preserves the moment when our modern world began. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Drop a comment below. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into one of geology's greatest stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more explorations of Earth's most dramatic moments. The story gets stranger when you realize that geologists can now date the formation with unprecedented precision using magnetostratigraphy, placing most of Hell Creek within magnetic chroms C30N through C29R, with the crucial KPG boundary lying within C29R. High-precision argon-argon dating ties this boundary to 66.02 million years ago, give or take just 20,000 years. That's remarkable precision for events that happened when the first mammals were still tiny creatures scurrying between the feet of giants. What transformed this ancient coastal plain into one of paleontology's most important sites wasn't just the retreat of the sea, it was what came next. The Hell Creek sediments accumulated as fluvial and deltaic deposits, capturing a complete record of life in the latest Maastrichtian period. River systems delivered rocky mountain detritus eastward into these newly exposed coastal plains, creating the perfect conditions for preserving the fossils that would later revolutionize our understanding of extinction. Standing in Hell Creek State Park today, at coordinates that place you within sight of Fort Peck Reservoir, you can see the legacy of that ancient seaway's retreat in every layer of exposed rock. The olive-grey mudstones smell strongly of lignite when freshly split, and siderite cemented nodules ring under a rock hammer like metallic bells field cues that have guided fossil hunters for over a century. But the real drama wasn't the slow environmental change as the sea withdrew. The Hell Creek Formation documents life thriving in this new world for over 1 million years, with dinosaur communities reaching extraordinary diversity just before something catastrophic happened. What that something was, and how we know it happened exactly when it did, is a story written in shocked quartz crystals and microscopic spherules of altered glass, evidence of an impact so violent it changed the course of evolution itself. How do scientists read such precise disaster scenarios from rocks deposited millions of years ago? In a laboratory at Princeton University, a mass spectrometer whirs to life as a technician feeds it microscopic zircon crystals extracted from a thin ash layer found within Hell Creek lignite. The machine's laser beam vaporizes the ancient minerals, and within minutes, the readout delivers a number that seems impossibly precise: 66.02 million years ago, plus or minus just 20,000 years. This level of precision in deep time represents a revolution in how scientists read Earth's most dramatic stories. The breakthrough came from combining multiple detective techniques that work like a forensic investigation across millions of years. Magnetostratigraphy provided the first crucial tool. Scientists discovered that Earth's magnetic field has flipped its polarity many times throughout history, and these reversals are recorded in the orientation of magnetic minerals within sedimentary rocks. The Hell Creek Formation falls primarily within magnetic chron C30, N through C29R, with a critical KPG boundary lying within C29R itself. Think of these magnetic reversals as a global barcode that allows geologists to correlate rocks of the same age across continents. But magnetic signatures alone couldn't provide the precision needed to understand exactly when the dinosaurs died. That required isotopic dating techniques that can measure the decay of radioactive elements trapped within volcanic ash beds. The argon-argon method became particularly powerful because it could date individual mineral grains to within tens of thousands of years. When applied to ash beds within the Z-coal, the basal lignite of the Fort Union Formation that sits just above the KPG boundary, this technique yielded that remarkably precise date, 66.02 million years ago. The Hell Creek Project, which ran from 1999 to 2009, revolutionized fieldwork by standardizing how geologists measured and described these crucial rock sequences. Teams developed systematic methods for identifying the KPG boundary in non-marine settings, creating integrated approaches that combined lithology, palynology, and geochemistry. They learned to look for a specific package of evidence, an abrupt shift from olive-grey mudstones to yellow-brown lignite horizons, often with a thin clay layer rich in spherules, accompanied by spikes in fern spores and the element iridium. Field recognition became an art form guided by subtle sensory cues. Boundary clays often weather to a pale grey-tan colour and feel conspicuously slick compared to enclosing lignite. Shocked quartz concentrates in thin, gritty laminae that feel sandy to the touch due to altered glass spherules. Hell Creek mudstones smell strongly of lignite when freshly split, while cedarite cemented nodules ring under a rock hammer like metallic bells, a field cue that helps identify overbank concretion horizons, where fossils are often preserved. Palynology, the study of pollen and spores, provided perhaps the most dramatic evidence of catastrophe. In section after section across southwestern North Dakota, researchers found the same pattern: diverse Cretaceous pollen assemblages abruptly replaced by simple fern-dominated communities. The fern spike became a key marker, representing the rapid colonization of devastated landscapes by hardy pioneer plants. This pattern was so consistent across 17 measured sections that it became a primary tool for locating the boundary even where the characteristic clay layer was absent or bioturbated. Geochemical analysis revealed the smoking gun that confirmed an extraterrestrial impact. Iridium, rare in Earth's crust but common in asteroids and comets, appears in anomalous concentrations at the KPG boundary worldwide. In Hell Creek sections, iridium enrichments reach subparts per billion to multi-parts per billion levels, concentrations that require an extraterrestrial source. Accompanying the iridium are shocked quartz grains, displaying distinctive planar deformation features that form only under extreme pressures, like those generated by hypervelocity impacts. The integration of these multiple lines of evidence created an unprecedented level of confidence in dating the extinction event. Osmium isotope ratios provided additional confirmation of a meteoritic source, while carbon isotope excursions in organic matter tracked the collapse and recovery of terrestrial ecosystems. When all these proxies aligned within the same thin stratigraphic interval, they painted a picture of global catastrophe that was both instantaneous and precisely timed. Perhaps most remarkably, scientists developed ways to measure sub-thousand-year scale events within these ancient rocks. CAIDTIMS, uranium lead dating and argon-argon analysis of interbedded ashes, could resolve events separated by just tens of thousands of years. This precision revealed that the mass extinction pattern and geochemical anomalies were globally synchronous to within 30,000 years of the Boundary Age, a remarkable agreement for events that happened 66 million years ago. The boundary itself often appears as a bipartite Tonstein pair within basal coals, with the upper bed bearing peak iridium concentrations and altered glass spherules. At some localities, these spherules are found within fishgill rakers alongside bedding features that suggest rapid burial evidence that has sparked intense debate about the immediate aftermath of the impact event. Modern analytical techniques continue to push the boundaries of precision. Teams now sample at 1 to 2 centimeter increments for iridium and osmium assays, creating geochemical profiles that can track environmental changes over intervals as short as a few thousand years. Mass spectrometry has even identified complex organic molecules and possible protein fragments in some Hell Creek fossils, though these claims remain actively debated within the scientific community. What transformed scattered observations into a coherent story of global catastrophe wasn't just better instruments, it was the systematic integration of multiple independent lines of evidence, each providing a different piece of the puzzle. But the most startling discoveries weren't made in laboratories at all. Who were the fossil hunters whose field discoveries first revealed the true drama preserved in these Montana badlands? Barnum Brown crouched in the blazing Montana sun of 1902, his hands carefully brushing sediment away from what would become the most famous predator in paleontological history. The massive skull, emerging from the Hell Creek sandstone, belonged to specimen AMNH 973, among the first Tyrannosaurus rex remains ever discovered, though Brown didn't yet know he was uncovering the king of dinosaurs. This moment launched Hell Creek Formation into scientific immortality, but it also began a treasure hunt that continues over a century later. Brown's expeditions for the American Museum of Natural History represented the beginning of systematic fossil collection from Hell Creek, establishing methods and priorities that would define paleontological fieldwork for generations. Working under Henry Fairfield Osborn, Brown and his crews transformed the remote badlands of eastern Montana into one of the world's most productive fossil sites. The conditions were brutal, summer temperatures regularly exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit, water was scarce, and the terrain consisted of loose, crumbling sediments that could shift underfoot without warning. The early 1900s represented a golden age of competitive fossil hunting, with major museums racing to fill their exhibition halls with spectacular dinosaur skeletons. Brown's field notebooks from this period reveal the mindset of these pioneering collectors. They sought complete, exhibition-quality specimens that would draw public attention and funding. Writing to Osborn about one potential specimen, Brown noted that it would make a fine exhibition, reflecting the era's emphasis on public spectacle over scientific detail. Brown's most significant Hell Creek discovery came during his 1908 expedition, when he uncovered AMNH 5027, a more complete Tyrannosaurus specimen that would become the mounted skeleton displayed at the American Museum for decades. The fossil emerged from Hell Creek sandstones in articulated condition, a rarity that suggested rapid burial and exceptional preservation conditions. This specimen provided the first detailed understanding of tyrannosaur anatomy and established the basic body plan that would define popular images of predatory dinosaurs. The techniques developed by these early expeditions seem primitive by modern standards, but were remarkably effective for their time. Teams used horse-drawn wagons to transport heavy plaster jackets containing fossils, and photographs from the period show elaborate pulley systems rigged to extract large specimens from steep badland exposures. Brown's crews learned to read Hell Creek geology like a roadmap, recognizing that certain sandstone lenses were more likely to preserve articulated skeletons, while mudstone intervals typically yielded isolated bones and teeth. Fast forward to the late 20th century, and Hell Creek fossil hunting had evolved into a high-tech enterprise, guided by sophisticated understanding of taphonomy, the science of how organisms become fossils. The Museum of the Rockies emerged as a major collecting institution under the leadership of paleontologist Jack Horner, whose teams applied systematic prospecting methods to Hell Creek exposures across Montana. Their discoveries would revolutionize understanding not just of dinosaur anatomy, but of dinosaur biology and behavior. MOR 555, nicknamed the Wankel Rex after its discoverer Kathy Wankel, represents one of the most complete Tyrannosaurus skeletons ever found. Discovered in Hell Creek sediments, the skeleton is approximately 45% complete exceptional preservation that allowed scientists to study tyrannosaur growth patterns, bone histology, and biomechanics with unprecedented detail. The specimen's discovery in 1988 marked a turning point toward modern paleobiological research, where fossils became windows into ancient ecology rather than just museum showpieces. Even more remarkable was the discovery of MOR 1125, informally known as B. rex, which emerged from Hell Creek sandstones with a scientific bombshell hidden within its bones. When researchers sectioned the specimen's femur for histological analysis, they discovered medullary bone, a specialized tissue that forms only in female birds during egg-laying periods. This ephemeral, calcium-rich reproductive tissue had never been identified in a dinosaur before, providing the first definitive method for determining the sex of a non-avian dinosaur. The medullary bone discovery required destructive sampling that would have been unthinkable to early collectors like Barnum Brown, who prioritized keeping specimens intact for exhibition. Modern paleontologists face constant tension between preserving fossils for future research and conducting analyses that require destroying portions of irreplaceable specimens. Advanced imaging techniques now allow researchers to study internal bone structure without destructive sampling, but chemical confirmation of medullary bone still requires physical samples. Follow-up work on MOR 1125 pushed the boundaries of what could be extracted from fossilized bone. After demineralization treatments, researchers reported finding soft tissue structures and collagen peptides preserved within the specimen, claims that sparked intense debate within the paleontological community. Mass spectrometry analyses supported the presence of ancient proteins, but critics argued that contamination from modern sources couldn't be ruled out completely. The controversy highlighted how Hell Creek specimens continue to challenge assumptions about the limits of fossil preservation. Modern Hell Creek collecting operates under strict scientific protocols that would seem alien to Brown's era. GPS coordinates are recorded for every significant find. Detailed stratigraphic sections are measured to place fossils within precise geological contexts, and sediment samples are collected for microvertebrate screening and pollen analysis. Teams now recognize that the matrix surrounding fossils often contains as much scientific information as the fossils themselves. The curation of Hell Creek collections reveals the evolution of paleontological priorities over more than a century. The American Museum houses classic specimens like AMNH 973 and AMNH 5027, alongside thousands of catalogued fragments and associated data. The Museum of the Rockies curates extensive Hell Creek collections with detailed repository guides and GPS-referenced field maps. The Denver Museum of Nature and Science maintains significant Hell Creek vertebrate collections that include both historic specimens and modern systematic samples. Repository accession systems now track not just specimens, but their associated data field photographs, stratigraphic measurements, preparation notes, and analytical results. This comprehensive documentation allows researchers to reconstruct the geological and environmental context of fossils collected decades apart, creating synthetic datasets that would have been impossible during the early museum expeditions. The transformation from treasure hunting to systematic science reflects broader changes in how paleontologists understand extinction and survival. Early collectors focused on large, complete specimens that told stories of individual animals. Modern teams recognize that understanding mass extinction requires statistical sampling of entire fossil communities, including the small mammals, plants, and invertebrates that provide crucial ecological context. But the most startling Hell Creek discoveries weren't made by museum expeditions at all. They emerged from a site that has challenged everything scientists thought they knew about the final moments of the Cretaceous period. What happens when paleontologists claim to have found fossils that preserve the actual day the dinosaurs died? Robert De Palma knelt beside a muddy outcrop near the Montana-North Dakota border, staring at something that seemed impossible. The gill rakers of an ancient fish filled with tiny glass spherules that appeared to have rained from the sky 66 million years ago. If his interpretation was correct, he was looking at fossils that preserved not just the aftermath of the asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs, but the actual day it happened. The Tanis locality represents either paleontology's most extraordinary discovery or its most controversial claim, depending on which scientists you ask. The site emerged from the Hell Creek Badlands like a geological crime scene frozen in time. De Palma and his team uncovered a rapidly emplaced deposit packed with fish, tree debris, and spherical glass beads that matched the chemical signature of material ejected from the Chicxulub crater in Mexico. The interpretation was audacious. This wasn't just another fossil site, but a snapshot of the hours immediately following the impact that ended the Mesozoic era. The evidence seemed almost too dramatic to believe. Accipinceriforms, sturgeon-like fish, and lepisostides, primitive gars, were found buried in sediments containing glass spherules lodged within their gill rakers. The hypothesis suggested these fish had been swimming in an ancient river when a surge of impact debris began raining from the sky. As spherules accumulated in the water column, the fish continued feeding and breathing, inadvertently filtering the fallout through their gills until a massive seiche, a standing wave triggered by seismic energy from the impact, buried them in a single catastrophic event. The bedding features at Tanis tell a story of violent hydraulic chaos. Sedimentary structures indicate rapid upriver flow, as if normal drainage patterns had been temporarily reversed by seismic waves propagating across the continent. Tree debris shows evidence of being stripped and transported by turbulent water, while the spherule-bearing sediments display the characteristics of rapid, high-energy deposition. If the interpretation is correct, Tanis preserves the geological equivalent of a photograph taken on the day the Cretaceous period ended. But the scientific community's response has been anything but unanimous acceptance. Critics have requested additional sedimentological tests to validate the surge model, questioning whether the observed features truly require the dramatic hydraulic processes proposed by the Tanis team. The preservation of spherules within gill rakers, while compelling, faces scrutiny about taphonomic pathways, the complex processes by which living organisms become fossils. Could these features have formed through more ordinary geological processes operating over longer timescales? The debate reflects broader tensions within paleontology about extraordinary claims and the burden of proof required to support them. Tanis interpretations remain under active scrutiny regarding hydraulics, timing, and the taphonomic mechanisms that could preserve such delicate ecological interactions across 66 million years. The ejecta chemistry and stratigraphic position align with the KPG window, but linking specific fossil occurrences to the immediate aftermath of impact requires establishing depositional processes that operate on timescales of hours, rather than the thousands or millions of years typically involved in fossil formation. Independent researchers have called for additional work to test the hydraulic models proposed for Tanis. The idea that seismic waves from an impact in Mexico could generate surge deposits in Montana requires specific conditions of water depth, sediment supply, and basin geometry that may be difficult to verify from the geological record alone. Some critics argue that similar depositional features could result from more conventional flooding events or seasonal variations in river flow. The spherules themselves provide some of the strongest evidence supporting an impact connection. Chemical analysis reveals compositions consistent with material ejected from the Chicxulub crater, and their distribution within the Tanis deposits suggests they arrived as a primary component of the depositional event, rather than being reworked from older sediments. However, establishing that these spherules were deposited within hours of the impact, rather than days or weeks later, requires assumptions about atmospheric transport and fallout patterns that are difficult to test directly. The fish fossils at Tanis raise additional questions about preservation mechanisms. Modern analogies for mass fish mortality events typically involve oxygen depletion, temperature changes, or chemical contamination processes that operate over days to weeks. The Tanis hypothesis requires essentially instantaneous burial to preserve the delicate association between spherules and gill structures. While such rapid preservation is not impossible, it represents an extreme scenario that requires exceptional geological circumstances. The scientific debate surrounding Tanis reflects healthy skepticism within the research community, but it also highlights the challenges of interpreting extraordinary events from the geological record. The asteroid impact that created the Chicxulub crater unleashed energies equivalent to billions of nuclear weapons, triggering global wildfires, massive tsunamis, and atmospheric disturbances that plunged the planet into darkness. The immediate effects of such an event would have been unlike anything preserved in the normal geological record, making it difficult to apply standard principles of uniformitarianism. The idea that geological processes operating today can explain features preserved in ancient rocks. Whether or not Tanis preserves the actual day of impact, the site has focused attention on the immediate aftermath of the KPG extinction event. The discovery has prompted researchers to look more carefully at Hell Creek boundary sections for evidence of rapid, high-energy depositional events that might have been overlooked in previous studies. Even if the most dramatic interpretations prove incorrect, Tanis has demonstrated that the KPG boundary preserves more complex depositional processes than previously recognized. The controversy also illustrates how scientific understanding evolves through debate and testing of alternative hypotheses. Initial claims about Tanis have been refined and qualified as additional data have emerged, and the interpretation continues to evolve as new analytical techniques are applied to the fossil and sedimentological evidence. This process of hypothesis testing and refinement represents the scientific method working as intended, even when the stakes involve rewriting textbooks about one of the most important events in Earth's history. The Tanis debate has broader implications for understanding mass extinction events and their preservation in the geological record. If sites like Tanis can preserve ecological interactions from the immediate aftermath of global catastrophes, they might provide unprecedented insights into how ecosystems collapse and recover following major environmental perturbations. But even as scientists argue about the details of impact effects and preservation mechanisms, a larger question looms: what was the world like before that catastrophic day 66 million years ago? What kind of ecosystems thrived in the Hell Creek region during the final million years before everything changed forever? A massive Triceratops bull lowered its head to drink from a slow-moving river in what is now eastern Montana, unaware that this was among the last times his species would ever taste fresh water. Around him, the Hell Creek landscape teemed with life that had evolved over millions of years into one of Earth's most complex terrestrial ecosystems, a biological masterpiece that had just days, perhaps hours, left to exist. The diversity of life in the final moments before the KPG extinction represents one of evolution's greatest achievements, making the coming catastrophe all the more tragic. The Hell Creek ecosystem supported over 300 plant species across the Dakotas region alone, creating angiosperm-dominated canopies that would look surprisingly familiar to modern eyes. Flowering plants had revolutionized terrestrial landscapes during the Cretaceous, and by 66 million years ago, they dominated the coastal plains where Hell Creek sediments accumulated. Conifers and ginkgos persisted along river levees and in backswamp environments, creating diverse forest mosaics that supported an incredible array of animal life. Stable isotope analysis of ceratopsian versus hadrosaur teeth reveals sophisticated ecological partitioning that had evolved to minimize competition between these massive herbivores. Triceratops and its relatives specialized in tougher, more fibrous vegetation, using their powerful beak-like mouths and shearing teeth to process plants that other herbivores couldn't handle effectively. Hadrosaurs like Edmontosaurus occupied different dietary niches. Their duck-like bills and complex dental batteries adapted for processing softer plant materials and aquatic vegetation. This dietary specialization reflects millions of years of evolutionary fine-tuning that allowed multiple giant herbivore species to coexist in the same landscape. The isotopic signatures preserved in fossilized tooth enamel show these patterns remained consistent across 4 different stratigraphic levels in the Hell Creek Formation, indicating stable ecological relationships that had persisted for hundreds of thousands of years, right up until the boundary. The predators that hunted these herbivore communities had likewise reached remarkable levels of specialization. Tyrannosaurus rex represented the apex of terrestrial predatory evolution, with individuals reaching lengths of over 12 meters and weights approaching 7 tons. But T. rex wasn't the only predator in the Hell Creek ecosystem. Smaller theropods like Thescelosaurus filled different ecological niches, while diverse crocodilians and champsosaurs dominated aquatic environments. The presence of both crocodiliforms and champsosaurs indicates that perennial freshwater bodies persisted across the coastal plain up to the boundary. These semi-aquatic reptiles required year-round water availability and stable temperatures, suggesting that the Hell Creek climate was both warmer and more humid than today's semi-arid conditions. The champsosaurs in particular represent an extinct group of reptiles that had no modern analogues, filling ecological roles that disappeared forever when the asteroid struck. Mammalian diversity in the latest Cretaceous Hell Creek fauna was greater than previously recognized, with multiple lineages that would either go extinct at the boundary or survive to become ancestors of modern mammalian groups. These mammals were still relatively small, most no larger than modern rats or opossums, but they had already begun diversifying into different ecological niches. Some specialized for insectivory, others for seed and fruit consumption, and still others for processing tough plant materials. The plant-animal interactions preserved in Hell Creek rocks reveal ecosystem complexity that rivals modern tropical forests. Leaf damage diversity studies from the Marmarth area document sophisticated plant-insect networks that had been developing for millions of years. The patterns of leaf damage indicate that different insect species had co-evolved with specific plant hosts, creating intricate webs of ecological dependency. These relationships represented evolutionary investments, spanning geological time periods, complex partnerships that would be severed forever by the coming catastrophe. Ginkgo leaf stomatal data from multiple Hell Creek sites provides a window into atmospheric conditions during the final million years of the Cretaceous. Carbon dioxide concentrations were higher than modern levels but stable across the studied interval, indicating that climate conditions were relatively steady leading up to the extinction event. This stability suggests that whatever caused the mass extinction, it wasn't gradual climate change or long-term environmental deterioration. The Hell Creek rivers themselves supported remarkable aquatic communities dominated by ancient fish lineages. Gar and sturgeon, both primitive bony fish groups, thrived in the warm, slow-moving waters that meandered across the coastal plain. These fish had survived multiple previous extinction events and seemed well adapted to environmental fluctuations, making their near-complete disappearance from the fossil record after the KPG boundary all the more striking. Turtle diversity in Hell Creek sediments reveals another dimension of ecosystem complexity. Multiple species occupied different aquatic and terrestrial niches, from small pond-dwelling forms to larger species that may have been primarily terrestrial. The variety of shell shapes and sizes indicates that turtle communities had partitioned available resources, much like the larger herbivorous dinosaurs, with different species specializing in different food sources and habitat types. Perhaps most remarkably, this entire complex ecosystem showed no signs of decline or instability in the final million years before the extinction. Quantitative modeling of dinosaur diversity produces mixed signals depending on sampling methods, but the most reliable analyses suggest that many dinosaur clades maintained stable or even increasing diversity right up to the boundary. Triceratops remains are found within meters of the KPG contact in multiple Hell Creek sections, indicating that large herbivore populations were robust until the very end. The carbon cycle data from Hell Creek organic matter shows no evidence of ecosystem stress or unusual environmental perturbations in the final Cretaceous. Carbon isotope ratios track normal plant photosynthesis and decomposition cycles, while the continued deposition of organic-rich sediments indicates healthy plant productivity. Whatever was about to happen came without warning from the perspective of the biological systems that had been functioning successfully for millions of years. Standing in the Hell Creek badlands today, it's difficult to imagine this landscape supporting such biological richness. The modern environment is harsh and semi-arid, dominated by grasses and drought-tolerant shrubs that represent a completely different ecosystem than the one preserved in the fossil record. The transformation from lush, diverse forests to today's sparse vegetation reflects not just the mass extinction event, but also major climate changes that occurred during the Cenozoic era. The tragedy of the KPG extinction wasn't just the loss of individual species, it was the destruction of ecological relationships that had taken millions of years to develop. When the asteroid struck, it didn't just kill dinosaurs, it severed evolutionary partnerships, collapsed food webs, and eliminated entire ecological guilds that would never be reassembled in quite the same way. But the Hell Creek ecosystem wasn't just passively waiting for disaster to strike, it was connected to a much larger world through networks of trade and migration that spanned continents. How did materials and organisms move across the vast distances of the latest Cretaceous world? And what does this tell us about the scale of the catastrophe that was coming? A single grain of quartz eroded from the Rocky Mountains began a journey that would take thousands of years, traveling hundreds of miles eastward through ancient river systems before finally settling into what would become Hell Creek sediments in eastern Montana. This microscopic traveler was just one of billions that document a continental-scale transformation as the Western Interior. Seaway's retreat connected previously isolated landmasses for the first time in millions of years. The movement of materials across the Hell Creek landscape reveals connections that would amplify the coming catastrophe on a truly continental scale. The regression of the Western Interior Seaway didn't just drain a sea, it fundamentally reorganized the geography of North America. For most of the Cretaceous period, the Seaway had divided the continent into separate land masses, with western North America isolated from the eastern regions by hundreds of miles of shallow marine waters. As the sea withdrew during the latest Maastrichtian, it created a continuous land bridge that allowed both materials and organisms to move freely across the continent for the first time in geological ages. Rocky Mountain detritus flowed eastward through this newly connected landscape via distributary river systems that delivered sediments all the way to the coastal plains where Hell Creek Formation accumulated. The Hell Creek Delta maps produced by the North Dakota Geological Survey document these ancient river networks, showing how drainage systems delivered mountain-derived materials across hundreds of miles to create the sedimentary deposits that would preserve the end Cretaceous fossil record. The scale of this material transport system was staggering. Sediments that originated in the Western Cordillera traveled through multiple river systems, carrying with them not just rock fragments and minerals, but also organic matter that would eventually become the lignite deposits so characteristic of Hell Creek stratigraphy. The thickness variations in Hell Creek deposits, ranging from about 60 meters in eastern North Dakota to over 100 meters in western areas, reflect this west to east transport pattern, with thicker accumulations closer to sediment source areas. Channel sand bodies within Hell Creek sediments preserve direct evidence of this ancient transport network. Multi-story channel deposits 10 to 30 meters wide record the paths of ancient rivers that carried materials across the coastal plain. Trough cross-bedding up to 1 meter thick and lateral accretion surfaces document meandering and anabranching river systems operating on a low-gradient landscape. These weren't small, local waterways, they were major continental drainage systems, comparable to the modern Mississippi River system in scale and complexity. The movement of materials also created the conditions that would make Hell Creek Formation such an exceptional fossil preserve. The constant influx of fine-grained sediments from distant mountain sources provided the rapid burial conditions necessary to preserve delicate biological structures. The organic-rich nature of many Hell Creek deposits reflects the transport and deposition of plant materials from vast upstream watersheds, creating reducing conditions that enhanced fossil preservation. But material transport was just one dimension of the connectivity that characterized the latest Cretaceous world. The retreat of the Western Interior Seaway also created migration corridors that allowed organisms to move between previously isolated biogeographic provinces. This biological exchange had been building for millions of years as the Seaway gradually retreated, creating opportunities for evolutionary interactions that would have been impossible when the continent was divided by marine barriers. The fossil record suggests that by the time Hell Creek sediments were accumulating, North American terrestrial ecosystems had achieved remarkable homogeneity across vast distances. Similar dinosaur species are found in formations spanning from Alberta to New Mexico, indicating that large-scale migration and gene flow were maintaining species cohesion across continental distances. This biological connectivity would prove crucial in determining which lineages survived the coming extinction and which disappeared forever. The atmospheric and oceanic circulation patterns of the latest Cretaceous also created connections that operated on a global scale. The warm, equable climate conditions that characterized this period resulted from circulation systems that transported heat and moisture across vast distances. When the asteroid impact occurred, these same circulation patterns would become the mechanisms through which environmental disturbances propagated around the planet. Evidence for these global connections appears in the geochemical signatures preserved in Hell Creek boundary sediments. The iridium anomaly, shocked quartz, and other impact markers found at the KPG boundary represent materials that were transported through the atmosphere from the Chicxulub impact site in Mexico. The presence of these markers in Hell Creek sections, thousands of miles from the impact crater, demonstrates how thoroughly connected the Earth system had become by the latest Cretaceous. The spherules found at some Hell Creek boundary localities provide even more direct evidence of long-distance transport. These tiny glass beads formed from rock vapor created by the impact were launched into the stratosphere and then fell back to Earth as a global layer of debris. Their preservation in Hell Creek sediments documents transport processes operating on timescales of hours to days across distances of thousands of miles. Ocean circulation patterns also created connections that would amplify the impact's effects. The Western Interior Seaway's final retreat was itself connected to global sea level changes driven by climate and tectonic processes operating on multiple continents. When the impact occurred, the resulting tsunamis and atmospheric disturbances propagated through oceanic and atmospheric systems that connected all of Earth's surface environments. The continental-scale river systems preserved in Hell Creek stratigraphy also reveal the infrastructure through which environmental changes would propagate inland from marine impact sites. These same river networks that had transported Rocky Mountain sediments eastward for millions of years would become conduits for transporting the chemical and biological effects of the impact throughout continental interior regions. Modern sequence stratigraphic analysis of Hell Creek deposits reveals that these sedimentary systems were responding to environmental changes operating on multiple timescales simultaneously. Local factors like seasonal flooding and channel migration were superimposed on regional patterns driven by climate and sea level changes, which were themselves connected to global processes including orbital cycles and volcanic activity from the Deccan Traps. The Deccan Traps volcanism, occurring on the opposite side of the planet from Hell Creek, provides another example of how globally connected Earth systems had become by the latest Cretaceous. Volcanic gases and aerosols from the main eruptive phases could be transported through atmospheric circulation systems to influence climate conditions in North America. Some researchers argue that Deccan volcanism was already stressing global ecosystems when the asteroid impact delivered the final blow. This global connectivity meant that the KPG extinction event, when it came, would be unlike any previous mass extinction in Earth's history. Earlier extinctions had often been regional in scope, or had developed gradually over thousands or millions of years. The end Cretaceous extinction would be both instantaneous and global, propagating through the very connection networks that had enabled the remarkable biological diversity preserved in Hell Creek sediments. The tragedy wasn't just that a thriving ecosystem was about to be destroyed, it was that the same global connections that had enabled life to flourish would become the mechanisms through which destruction spread to every corner of the planet. But before that final catastrophe struck, the creatures living in this connected world had developed something that set them apart from all previous life on Earth. Complex behaviors and social systems that hints at the emergence of intelligence itself. What do Hell Creek fossils tell us about the inner lives of the dinosaurs and other creatures that were about to face the ultimate test of survival? In a laboratory at Montana State University, researchers carefully sectioned the femur of Moor 1125, the Hell Creek Tyrannosaurus, known as B. rex, and discovered something that revolutionized understanding of dinosaur biology: medullary bone, a specialized tissue that forms only in female birds preparing to lay eggs. For the first time in the history of paleontology, scientists could look at a fossil and know they were seeing evidence of an individual animal's reproductive state at the moment of death. This discovery opened a window into the private lives of creatures that lived 66 million years ago, revealing glimpses of complex behaviors and biological processes that had been hidden in stone. The medullary bone in MOR 1125 represents more than just a sex determination. It provides evidence of sophisticated reproductive timing in one of the largest land predators that ever lived. This calcium-rich tissue forms rapidly in modern birds during egg production, requiring precise hormonal coordination and metabolic investment. The presence of medullary bone in a Hell Creek tyrannosaur suggests that these massive predators had evolved complex reproductive physiology comparable to modern birds, with females capable of mobilizing enormous amounts of calcium for eggshell production. Follow-up research using multiple histochemical tests confirmed the medullary bone identification, strengthening the evidence for advanced reproductive biology in non-avian dinosaurs. The implications extend far beyond simple sex identification. Medullary bone formation requires sophisticated endocrine control systems and suggests that Hell Creek dinosaurs possessed the kind of complex physiological regulation associated with warm-blooded metabolism and parental care behaviors. But the fossil record preserved in Hell Creek sediments reveals evidence of much more complex behaviors than just reproduction. The discovery of soft tissue structures in some Hell Creek specimens pushed the boundaries of what paleontologists thought possible about molecular preservation. After demineralization treatments, researchers reported finding collagen peptides, and other organic molecules preserved within fossil bones, molecular ghosts of ancient life that had somehow survived for 66 million years. The soft tissue discoveries remain controversial within the scientific community, with critics arguing that modern contamination cannot be completely ruled out. However, mass spectrometry analyses have provided chemical signatures consistent with ancient proteins, and the preservation appears to occur only in specimens with specific burial conditions and mineral replacement patterns. If confirmed, these molecular remnants could provide unprecedented insights into dinosaur physiology, diet, and even stress responses at the time of death. The Hell Creek fossil record also preserves evidence of complex ecological behaviors that required sophisticated information processing capabilities. The dietary partitioning between ceratopsians and hadrosaurs documented through isotope analysis suggests that these herbivores had evolved behavioral mechanisms for avoiding competition. This kind of resource partitioning requires species recognition, habitat assessment, and flexible foraging strategies that indicate considerable cognitive complexity. Plant-insect interactions preserved in Hell Creek leaf fossils reveal co-evolutionary relationships that had been developing for millions of years. The diversity of leaf damage patterns indicates that insects had evolved highly specialized feeding behaviors, with different species targeting specific plant tissues and employing various strategies to overcome plant chemical defenses. These interactions required complex sensory capabilities and behavioral flexibility from both plants and insects, evolutionary arms races that produce sophisticated biological technologies. The preservation of bite marks on an Edmontosaurus mummy from Hell Creek provides direct evidence of predator-prey interactions and scavenging behaviors. The deflated but three-dimensional skin shows perimortem damage that indicates scavenging occurred before the carcass was completely buried. The pattern of bite marks suggests that multiple scavenger species were accessing the carcass, possibly indicating complex behavioral interactions around food resources. Taphonomic studies of Hell Creek bone deposits reveal evidence of herding or group behavior in some dinosaur species. Bone orientations in channel deposits show preferred alignments parallel to ancient water flow, but some accumulations appear to represent mass mortality events rather than simple hydraulic sorting. These bone jams might preserve evidence of groups of animals that died together during seasonal migrations or while seeking water during drought conditions. The Hell Creek macrofloral record preserves evidence of complex plant reproductive strategies and seasonal timing. The diversity of flowers, fruits, and seeds found in Hell Creek sediments indicates that plants had evolved sophisticated mechanisms for attracting pollinators and dispersing propagules. Some of these reproductive strategies required coordination with animal behavior cycles, timing flower production to coincide with pollinator activity, or producing fruits when dispersal agents were most active. The presence of both crocodilians and champsosaurs in Hell Creek aquatic environments suggests complex behavioral interactions in freshwater habitats. Modern crocodilians exhibit sophisticated territorial behaviors, parental care, and social hierarchies that require considerable cognitive capabilities. The persistence of both groups in Hell Creek ecosystems implies that they had evolved behavioral mechanisms for resource partitioning and coexistence. Perhaps most intriguingly, some Hell Creek specimens show evidence of injury recovery and long-term survival with disabilities. Healed fractures and pathological conditions in dinosaur bones indicate that some individuals survived serious injuries and continued living for extended periods. This kind of survival might require behavioral flexibility, changes in foraging strategies, or even social support from group members. The Hell Creek mammalian fauna, while small-bodied, shows evidence of diversification into different behavioral niches. Different species had evolved specialized feeding behaviors, with some focused on insectivory, others on seed consumption, and still others on processing tough plant materials. This behavioral diversification required sensory adaptations, motor skills, and cognitive capabilities that would prove crucial for survival through the coming extinction event. The carbon isotope signatures preserved in Hell Creek organic matter provide indirect evidence of complex ecosystem-level behaviors. The stable carbon cycle recorded in these sediments reflects the integrated activities of entire biological communities: plant photosynthesis, herbivore feeding, predator hunting, and decomposer, recycling, all operating in coordinated patterns that had been maintained for millions of years. Standing in the Hell Creek Badlands today, it's difficult to imagine the complexity of behaviors and ecological interactions that these sediments preserve. The modern landscape is relatively simple compared to the intricate biological networks that existed here 66 million years ago. The fossil record provides only fragmentary glimpses of ancient behaviors, but even these fragments reveal cognitive and social complexity that challenges simple assumptions about primitive extinct organisms. The tragedy of the coming extinction wasn't just the loss of individual species or even entire ecosystems. It was the destruction of millions of years of behavioral evolution, the severing of co-evolutionary relationships, and the elimination of complex information processing systems that would never evolve again in quite the same way. But even as sophisticated biological systems reached their peak complexity in the Hell Creek ecosystem, forces beyond anyone's comprehension were already in motion, forces that would test every behavioral adaptation and cognitive capability that evolution had produced over millions of years. How did the most complex terrestrial ecosystem in Earth's history respond when the sky itself became the enemy? 3 centimeters above the thin grey clay that marks the end of the Cretaceous period, the first fern spores appear in Hell Creek sediments, hardy pioneer plants beginning the slow work of rebuilding a world that had been burned to ash just days or weeks earlier. This microscopic green resurrection, preserved in North Dakota mudstones for 66 million years, represents both an ending and a beginning that continues to shape life on Earth today. The story of Hell Creek isn't just about what died, it's about what survived, what emerged, and what this ancient catastrophe reveals about the resilience and fragility of life itself. The immediate aftermath of the KPG extinction event unfolded with startling rapidity in Hell Creek sediments. Within centimeters to decimeters above the boundary clay, the earliest Paleocene worm burrows and microbial algal mats appear, indicating ecological recovery on sub-thousand-year scales. These trace fossils represent the first signs of complex life, returning to devastated landscapes, simple organisms beginning the long process of rebuilding soil communities that would eventually support more complex ecosystems. The fern spike that appears consistently across Hell Creek boundary sections tells the story of how life initially responded to global catastrophe. Ferns, with their wind-dispersed spores and ability to colonize disturbed ground rapidly, became the dominant plants across vast areas of the post-impact landscape. This fern-dominated interval lasted for thousands of years in some areas, creating ecosystems unlike anything that exists on Earth today, entire continents covered by simple plant communities that represented a massive step backward in ecological complexity. But even as Hell Creek documents the most severe extinction event in terrestrial history, it also preserves evidence of remarkable evolutionary opportunities created by the catastrophe. The earliest Paleocene mammals that appear in Bug Creek anthills and other localities represent the beginning of mammalian diversification that would eventually lead to the rich faunas of the Cenozoic era. These small, seemingly insignificant creatures inherited a world emptied of its largest inhabitants, and they rapidly began evolving to fill the vacant ecological niches. The recovery documented in Hell Creek and Fort Union sediments reveals patterns that continue to influence modern conservation, biology, and ecosystem management. The carbon cycle perturbation, recorded in continental sediments, lasted less than 5,000 years. Remarkably rapid recovery, considering the scale of the initial disruption. This suggests that Earth's climate system possesses powerful self-regulating mechanisms, but also demonstrates how quickly stable conditions can be disrupted by sufficiently large external shocks. Modern climate scientists study the KPG extinction as an analog for understanding how Earth's systems respond to rapid environmental change. The atmospheric CO2 drawdown and ecosystem restructuring documented in the first 500,000 years after the impact provide insights into how biological and geochemical systems interact during periods of environmental stress. The Hell Creek record shows that while life can recover from catastrophic disruption, the recovery process creates fundamentally different ecosystems rather than simply restoring previous conditions. The Press Pulse framework developed from studying the KPG extinction has become a standard model for understanding how multiple stressors interact to drive extinction events. The Deccan Trap's volcanism provided long-term stress over hundreds of thousands of years, while the Chicxulub impact delivered the terminal pulse that pushed ecosystems beyond their capacity to recover. This model helps scientists understand how modern environmental stresses, habitat, fragmentation, pollution, climate change, might interact to produce extinction events comparable to those preserved in the geological record. The precision with which Hell Creek sections can now be dated has revolutionized understanding of extinction and recovery processes. Sub-100,000-year resolution achieved through high-precision geochronology allows scientists to track ecosystem changes at timescales relevant to human civilization. This temporal precision reveals that mass extinction events unfold much more rapidly than previously thought, but also that recovery processes can begin surprisingly quickly once environmental conditions stabilize. The molecular preservation documented in some Hell Creek specimens continues to push the boundaries of what can be extracted from ancient fossils. While controversial, claims of preserved proteins and other organic molecules suggest that the fossil record might contain much more biological information than traditionally assumed. If these preservation claims are validated, they could provide unprecedented insights into the physiology and biochemistry of extinct organisms. The Hell Creek fossil record has become a touchstone for debates about the role of humans in modern extinction events. The end Cretaceous extinction provides a natural experiment for understanding how ecosystems respond to rapid environmental change, offering both cautionary lessons and reasons for optimism about life's capacity for recovery. The rapid diversification of mammals following the dinosaur extinction demonstrates evolution's remarkable ability to exploit new opportunities, but the millions of years required for full ecosystem recovery also illustrates the temporal scales involved in biological restoration. Perhaps most profoundly, Hell Creek challenges human assumptions about permanence and change in natural systems. The diverse, stable ecosystems preserved in Hell Creek sediments had persisted for millions of years with only gradual evolutionary change. The sudden transformation documented at the KPG boundary demonstrates that even the most successful biological systems can be vulnerable to sufficiently large external shocks. This perspective has implications for understanding the stability of modern ecosystems and the potential consequences of human-induced environmental changes. The ongoing scientific debates surrounding Hell Creek about Tanis and impact effects, about the role of volcanism versus impact, about the pace of dinosaur decline reflect the dynamic nature of scientific understanding. Each new analytical technique and each new fossil discovery has the potential to revise or refine interpretations of events that happened 66 million years ago. This continuing evolution of scientific knowledge demonstrates that even well-established historical narratives remain open to revision based on new evidence. Standing in Hell Creek State Park today, visitors can see the same rock layers that preserve evidence of the most dramatic environmental transition in Earth's history. The thin clay layer that marks the KPG boundary appears unimpressive, just a few centimeters of grey sediment weathering out of badland exposures. But this modest-looking geological feature represents a moment when the trajectory of life on Earth changed forever, ending one evolutionary experiment and beginning another that ultimately led to the emergence of human consciousness capable of reading its own planet's history. The Hell Creek story isn't finished. New analytical techniques continue to extract additional information from these rocks, and new fossil discoveries regularly revise understanding of latest Cretaceous ecosystems and extinction processes. Climate scientists, conservation biologists, and evolutionary researchers continue to mine the Hell Creek record for insights relevant to understanding modern environmental challenges. The sea that once covered this landscape drained away 69 million years ago, leaving behind sediments that would preserve one of the most important stories ever written in stone. The hell that early geologists found in these badlands was actually a treasure trove of scientific information that continues to reveal secrets about life, death, and recovery on a planetary scale. The regression of the Western Interior Seaway had indeed left hell behind, but it was a hell that contained the keys to understanding heaven and earth, extinction and evolution, endings and beginnings that continue to unfold in the modern world. We're only scratching the surface. The next story is even wilder. Subscribe before it drops.